Okay, good morning. We are continuing. We're starting Hilchos Mikvaos, Siman Reish Aleph, and Dine HaMikvah Umeimav. We're just going to start right away with Seif Aleph, and the Shulchan Aruch will suffice as his own intro to Hilchos Mikvaos. Here we go. Ein ha'isha ola mitumata berechitza b'merchatz. Right, we all know this. A woman can't go into a bath and be kosher, tahara from her tuma. Vafilu alu alea kol meimot sheba'olam. Even if you have all the water in the world poured on you, adayin hi betumata. According to halacha, she's still in 100% betuma. And if she goes with the man, v'chayevim alea karet, and she's chayav kares, right? If she's a nida or zava, ad shetitbo kol gufa bevatachat. The halacha is clear. Anyone who needs to go to the mikvah must go in their entire body, all their body and all their hair, all together, all at once. Okay, right? That's a din Torah. Very simple. B'mei mikvah, but and it must be in a mikvah or in a omayan, a spring of water. Sheyesh bahem arba'im se'ah, and it must be 40 se'ah. What is that? A waterfall? A waterfall counts. It's a kosher mikvah if it's a mayan. If it's from rainwater, we're going to get to it's a problem of Zochalin. But if it's mayan, if it's a spring water. Now we all know all water starts. It's a whole circular, right? It's we have water underground and we have water in the shamayim, and it just circulates, whatever it's called. The water starts out when the fresh when it rains. That rainwater, we're going to see the difference, has a status of rainwater, and it's only kosher if it's in a still bore. But that water gets nivla, it gets absorbed into the ground, and then when it comes out of the ground also. It turns that water, that same rainwater, believe it or not, it turns into the spring water. And that spring water is now a ma'ayan. So it's that same water, same H2O, but has two different statuses based on where it comes from to our naked eye. Right? Or to whatever. Sheish behen arba'im sa'ah has to have arba'im sa'ah. And if it's missing a kol shehu of the 40 sa'ah, right? That's the 40 sa'ah that was halacha l'Moshe Misinai, basically. We're going to get to that. But it's, okay, it must be 40 sa'ah. Now, the truth is, I think we're going to say it, but mina Torah, if it's a mayan, a kol shehu is enough. Midarabanan, for a human, it needs to be 40 sa'ah. Even a mayan. Midaraisa kol shehu is enough. Again, it's good to review all this in Hilchos Mikvaos. It's just one masachet. But anyways, let's go on. But l'maisa for us, it means 40 se'ah. V'shi'uram ama, but if it's a mayan for kalim, kol shehu is enough. We'll see that. The post can point out. V'shi'uram ama al ama, rum shalosh amot. B'meruba. I'll keep reading. Now, Chazal say, what is the shir? Halacha l'Moshe Misinai is 1 by 1 by 3 amos. Okay? All right? It's a volume. Now, what kind of an amma? Normally, we're used to using an amma, which is 6 times 4 fingers. Etzba'ot. Ba'ama bat shisha tfachim v'chetzi etzba. But there's 2 kinds of an amma. One's sochakot, the smiley ones, and the atzuvot, the more sad ones, which means, are your fingers spread apart? Like when you smile, you extend your lips more. So anyways, do you, right, so is there a little bit of an airspace, a tiny bit, between each finger or not? And so that'll make the difference if in every, right, and there's 6 tfachim in an amma, and in each tafach, you have 4 etzba'ot, but it's either 4 right near, smushed together, or with a little bit of revach. So normally we go with 4 exactly, but here it's 4 point, as he says, shisha tfachim v'chetzi etzba. For every amma or shisha tfachim, you get an extra half of an etzba, which according to Rav Chaim Na is a centimeter. V'im hu rachab yoter v'eno gavoa kol kach kasher. Now it's all based on volume, so it doesn't have to be 3 high. 3 amos high, your mikvah could be 1 amma high, but then it needs to be 3 wide. Right? It just has to be the volume, so it could be in any shape. kasher. Im yechola litkasot kol gufa behen bevat achat. Provided that a person can get their entire body in there. Now, 1 by 3 is really considered the minimum. That's where the shear comes from. That's considered the minimum size a person can fit into. But practically speaking, it's a little bit difficult because you have to fit exactly. But anyways, that's the shear. V'tzarich shi'aleh v'tishboret mem daled elef v'kuf yurchet etzbaot begodal ve'od chetzi etzba. So the Shulchan Aruch does the calculation for us, right? It's what was it? 4 times 20 times 6, but it's 24.5 because it's an extra, and you do that 24 times 24, that's the 1 by 1, plus 3 times 24, which is 70 something. And so you do that all together, you end up with exactly his number, 44,118. And as our Gershom pointed out, it's 375, but he rounds off to a half. And that's the, then you need to have cubic etzbaot. How many? 44,118 and a half. Now, if you turn that into centimeters or liters, you have to times it by 8 because it's 2 centimeters and it's cubed. So 2 times 2 times 2 is going to be 8. So 8 times 44,000 comes out to about 353 liters, or about 93 gallons. So if you look it up, most will say now the mikvah, the minimum size of the mikvah ranges from 353 to 750 liters, or 93 to 200 gallons, based on or the Chazon Ish. Okay, so obviously we always try and have the bigger shear, no questions. But okay, it depends what's available. V'tzarich sheyeh charitz shabo hamayim gadol yoter mishur zeh. Obviously, he says your bore, your pit, your pool, whatever it is, should be bigger than that shear, so that you have enough for that water to be in there. Because you need to be able to go in there and you still have that water. Right? If you were to have a pit that's exactly that shear and it's filled up with water, as soon as you go in there, well, half the water is going to fall right out, or most of the water is going to come right out. And then when you look around, there's no water left. So okay, so it needs to be bigger than that, obviously. Okay, let's get to bet. Meimayan metaharim af bezochalin. No, the spring water, it's metahir even by zochalin, even if it's in a stream, it's moving water, it's flowing water. Perish zochalin imshachim v'hochim ve'ena mechunasim. Right? It's moving and it's not gathered in one still place. So that's what Zochalin, where we see the word Zochalin refers to that. And so therefore, if you have a source of water, a spring, so then it's okay if it's moving, it's okay if it's a waterfall, and then as long as you're completely immersed in it at one time, then it's kosher. Technically, a waterfall is going to be hard to get your whole body in there, but it is possible, as we'll see. Even by a wave, we say it's possible. But I don't know if it's just theoretical or really. But anyways, how practical. Shamim, ein metaharin ella be'ashboren. Now, rainwater, right? Once it hits the rain or turns into snow and lands on the mountains and then melts and then comes down. So this is called megashamim. Okay, we'll get to snow later. It helps us with mayim sheuvin, but here we're talking about megashamim. It's the only way it's kosher to be matahar as a mikvah is if it's still. Can't be a moving body of water. It has to be completely still. Again, we're going to get into a little more details of that. But basically, you have to be able to look at it and you can't see any movements. At what point, how much is allowed? It's a discussion. I'm not sure if we'll get into there or not. If it's completely insignificant and you cannot recognize it, so then at some point, it's not a problem. For example, you can have a mikvah in the ground. Right? You dig out dirt and you turn it into a mikvah. It's true. You leave it there over a number of days. Besides the evaporation factor, some of it will slowly seep into the ground. That's not a problem. That the poskim, the Rishonim say, is not an issue. But more than that is when it becomes a real problem. And it's a whole question, machlokes Rishonim. But anyways, bottom line, it has to be completely still. So if you go to a river, so then it's important to know if the river is spring water or rainwater, because the river is flowing. So if you want to use that for rainwater, we're going to get to Yamima. Hopefully we'll get there inside, and we'll discuss that soon. The lashon of Ashboren, well, perush makom amok shebitkanskin bo hamayim v'nikra Ashboren. So that's just an expression. You have to know that word. Where does that word come from? In that word is the word bor, but I didn't see anyone talk about that. What I did see they say is it's milashon shvira, because it has the shin over there. Shvira, get cracks in the ground, and then the water flows through the cracks, and they meet up, and they end up in some kind of into the karka, a mikveh mayim where it gathers. So that's where the expression, the word ashboren comes from. Haga aval ayedei zechila psuli minatara. Now this is a psul deraisa. It's not the rabbanan. About rainwater, if it's moving, it must be completely still. Im heim lachud below mayan. Unless it's mixed with a mayan, we're going to get into that later. Here we are. If the Zochalin, that means spring water, mixes up with notfim. Notfim by definition just means rainwater. Harei kol b'mayan l'kol davar. So then it all becomes like a mayan because there's more Zochalin, more mei mayan than mei geshamim. So that's 100% no problem. It needs to be rove. So there's a discussion about that, and it may be more of an issue derabanan, but as long as it's rove, it's a problem. It cannot, we're going to get into that. Hashaka helps you, and it makes a chibur. I'll just say it right now, because I'm not sure if she'll get there, and since you mentioned it, we're going to get into a concept of shoferet hanod. Shoferet hanod, as we had this before, it's an opening. Right? What does it literally mean? It's a node. It's a leather canteen they used to have, right? They didn't have plastic canteens, and it was a leather canteen. And how did they fill it up? We might use a funnel. They had a tube. You put in a shoferet, a tube. The standard tube in those days is the amount to turn your two fingers, your pointer and your middle finger. And you rotate it, so it has to have a little bit of give, can't be too tight, and that's the shear. So generally speaking, the minimum shear in the poskim is probably about 4 centimeters. I mean, that is what it is approximately. But lamaisa, we usually, to be yotze, we use the minimum, according to be yotze kol hadeos. It's very important. And what most fingers are nowadays is it must be 5 centimeters. That's what. If you go to any mikvah, they're going to be usually between 5 and 6. Rav Davidovich usually likes to make it closer to 6, but it's always 5 minimum. Sometimes he says he likes to do 7, but you can't always choose the size because you go to a hardware store and buy the pipes that exist. So you have to work with what's there. Okay. So anyways, minimum in a mikvah you're going to see is 5. Amir of Gilman will hopefully point out to you why there's a couple holes in the wall, not just one. We'll see. That's for later. I'm just. Before you come back, okay, so where are we? Shoferet Hanod. Shoferet Hanod, when you have that opening, it makes it where when you have between two bodies of water, that opening, if it's filled with water, it makes a connection and it makes it a complete chibur. You can have a half a mikvah and a half a mikvah, like 20 and 20, and it's connected, then now you have a kosher mikvah. You just have to physically be able to fit in there. Like you can put a dish in there. But so that works. If there are times, we're not going to get into it, but there are times when it could even be kosher. If it's 100% kosher mikvah min hatara, a 40 se'ah, sometimes you can have a chuta sa'ara, that's a mishnah, just a connection of just a mashu, and that'll make it so it's kosher. If it's a psul min derabanan. But whatever, for all practical purposes, in most situations, the shear for connecting is always going to be shoferet hanod. So, okay. Harry, what was that? Right. Fine. Im rabu me geshamim al mei naher. But now, what if the rainwater is more than in the river than the springs? Einam metarim zochalin. So it can no longer help you for zochalin. Again, the Rai says there's machlokas rishonim how to deal with it, and it might be kosher, but it needs to be the Ashboren. When it goes after Rove, at least that's for the halacha of if it has to be Ashboren or if it can still be flowing. Lefikach, sarich lahakif mapatz perush kein machzelet. So let's say you go to a river, right? You go to a river and you're afraid, or you know that most of the water comes from rainwater, right? So then you have a problem. What do you do? So the Shulchan Aruch based on the Rambam. I'll just quick reminder. I pointed out it's based on the Gemara of Shabbos Samech Hey about Avua the Shmuel with the mapats. So we had 3 times the mapats. So again, it's a whole machlokas rishonim. What is the mapats talking about? And it's not according to all opinions, but the Shulchan Aruch brings all 3. You have a mapats to step on, so you don't get muddy. Right? We learned that by Chatzitza. You had a mapats for tznius. If she's going to dip in the mikvah and she's by the port and all the guys are watching, so you have to make a mechitza with the. Here's another perush, which the Shulchan Aruch brings halacha, is if you're in a river and it's flowing. So what do? You obviously it depends on the situation, but if the current isn't too strong and maybe it juts out a little bit, you take a mapat, take a wall, can be Gevis walls, you can take a mapats, and you put it up around you, and that'll stop the flow around you, and it'll turn the water inside where you are into an Ashboren, where the water is still. So that's what he's telling you to do. You're going to ask me, how's it possible? So I'll just point out, because we learned you can't see any moving water. So we hold you can't see any moving water. But it's a mochlokes rishonim, how much water can it be a little bit moving from the side through a crack? And also the Gemara points out, he must be talking about the season where the Gemara talks about, there's 2 seasons. I don't get into all the details, but the Gemara just points out, it's talking about a case where the flow of the river is very minor. Because if it's a strong current, you put up a mapats, the water is going to run right through you. It's talking about a case where there's a very low current, and therefore, if you put up a mapats on the side, you put up some kind of a barrier, it can make the water where you're standing not move, and then we're good. Okay, again, not everyone holds of this, but it's okay. It's here. Haga. And so one should teach to be machmer. That anytime you're in a river that has water from Mei Geshamim, you don't use it unless you put this up. Aval. Yesh matirin. Some say, wait a second, it's mutter. Litbol benaharot kol hashana af bishat geshamim v'avshrat shlagim. Let's say during the year, this river flows all year long, but now it's right after the rainy season, and there's a much stronger current, and you see the level of the river is higher. So right now that there's so much more water here because of the rainwater, even more rainwater than the natural spring water. Like there is some spring, but it's a mixture. So what do? Even though now even though there's more rainwater than Zochalin, right? More than spring water. Even if there's more, it's still mutter, right? That's the Mekel opinion. He says you shouldn't rely on it, but you could. There's what to be somach on. Mishum de ikar gidul hanar hu b'makom mikaro. Because the main water comes from under the ground. In other words, if there's more rainwater, there's also going to be more spring water, because spring water comes from the rain. So even though you think it's all because of rainwater, we're assuming that a lot of the rainwater turns into spring water because it gets absorbed into the mountain, and the springs are also getting stronger. So that's the ve'ein limchot biyad noagim lahakel. So one should not be against, or one should not speak up against those who are mekil. Keish lahem amashi yismochu miu yesh li zar mitol benar hamitavel gamrei al yedei hagshamim. But if you have a river that's dried up, and now so you see that shows you there's really no spring water. The only reason why you have water now is because of the rain. So then that's a real problem. But that's going to be puzzle for sure. But if the water doesn't completely end, there's always some water there. Even though there are other rivers that are going into there, Umitava yadan, and becomes more water. Mikol makom hoelu posek legamri b'shah she'ena geshem. But if it does stop completely, so then it's asr litvo bo derech zechilato, and it's asr to use it while it's a flow, because rainwater cannot be kosher mikvah if it's flowing. Ad sheyikvu amayim shebetocho, until all comes together. Aval benar ein she'eno posek alfa pi shebishat geshamim midracha v'mitpashit al kol geditav. Even though it gets bigger, mutter, as we said before, litvo bo b'kol makom lefi svarat hamekilim lefi mashen nahagu. Okay. You can, yeah. If you're the Makel opinion. Okay. I want to just do a couple more. Gimel. Arba'im sa'asha'am litzarek shalei she'uvim. Now, this is a big topic. Mayim she'uvim. Water that you picked up with a kli. Again, we're not going to, all the filters and all these other things, it's a whole discussion. We're machmer, generally speaking, for all these things. But just plain pipes, that's not a problem. Plain pipes where there's no containers and no filters, that's not a problem. Like if you get a pipe from the roof that brings the water straight into the mikveh, that's not going to be a problem of mayim she'uvim. Mayim she'uvim means you picked it up with a kli. Okay? And now, so water can't be mayim she'uvim. Shimayu she'uvim psulim. Then it's psulim. Now, Rambam, most Rishonim say that's only a psul midirabanan. So that you don't come to go into a mikvah inside a bathtub. But the Rabbeinu Tam and the Ramah Paskins, v'im kol mikvah she'uvim pasol minatar. But if the entire mikvah is mayim she'uvim, so he holds that's a pasol minatara, usfeika lachumra, and therefore a safek goes lachumra. Aval im rova mikvah kasher, but if most of it is mei geshamim, or any mikvah that's not she'uvim, that's the topic here. So then v'hamiutu she'uvim, but just a minority, eno ela midarabanan usfeiko lakula. Mikvah shuhu shel goy u'makabel imenu sachar ein laminu lagoy elav ela, to jump to hay, and then we'll read it inside tomorrow. You'll see with Rav Gilman. I just want to say, I'm just going to read one line, and he'll say the whole thing later. Kol hayamim meishalhem din mayan letar b'zechila, because this is really tied to what we said until now. Is all bodies of water, all lakes and all oceans are kosher. How do we know? The Mishnah tells us in Parakei Mikvaos, it's Rabbi Yossi, and it's basically Xeris Akasuv, perhaps you want to call it Echol Moshe Misinai, but basically it's a Xeris Akasuv from Mikveh Amayim Karayamim, right, in the beginning of Bereshis. So from there we know all bodies of water. If you want to go to the Kinneret, you want to go anywhere to the mikveh that's a body of water, Yom HaMelech, no? We'll take it as the salt. Sorry. But any normal body of water, we'll take a Yam HaMelech, any normal body of water is a kosher mikveh. The oceans, the Kinneret, anything. Even if you think most of the water might come from the rain, it doesn't matter. Even though the water moves, it doesn't matter. That's the halacha because of the pasuk. And what's it called? 3 basic perushim you'll find in that point out why. Because it's normal for the flowing rivers to all go into the ocean, and therefore that's what's normal. That the Zochalin, they all feed into the Yamim, and so therefore it's more of an explanation. But that's why any Yam has a special status of being kosher for the purposes of Zochalin, even if it's moving. Kol shehu, maybe not. We'll discuss tomorrow. But the other perush is because it's normal. Yamim, all Yamim have currents and waves or whatever. There's always movement, just like a river. That's why a river is always kosher when it flows. So too, all the Yamim are always kosher because there's always flowing. And the last perush is because there's an assumption that most of the water in any ocean or lake, the chazaka is, it comes from springs. You may not know where the springs are. You may not realize it's from a spring, but the majority is actually spring water that comes into the ocean versus rainwater.